The moment Kamala Harris stepped onto the memorial stage, the quiet that spread through the crowd wasn't solemn. It was uneasy. Sunlight reflected off the polished podium. Neatly arranged flowers lined the edge of the platform. Behind her, a large digital screen played a looping montage of Charlie Kirk's life, his speeches, demonstrations, moments of joy and intensity off stage. Karoline Levitt stood in a fitted navy blazer, holding a folded American flag close to her chest. She could sense something unusual. Kamala wasn't simply there to pay tribute. She was about to take control the moment S. Harris began her address. Her tone carried the same deliberate softness she often used on late-night shows that we gather here today to remember a young man who, though we may have disagreed, was passionate, committed, and complex, she said, stretching each word with practice. Karoline's jaw tightened. Passionate, complex. Just weeks before Charlie's death, the White House had labeled him a threat to democracy. DHS had added his name to internal watch lists. Kamala had stayed silent when he was doxxed, threatened, and publicly vilified. Now, with cameras broadcasting, she was acting as if she mourned him. When Harris spoke Charlie's name again, exhaling heavily, Karoline felt her pulse rise. This wasn't just anger, it was something deeper. She stepped forward. An aide near the stairs reacted quickly. One spoke into her MIC, another moved toward her, but Karoline didn't stop. The flag in her arms was pressed firmly against her ribs, her posture steady. The crowd began murmuring as she climbed the steps. Harris faltered mid-sentence. Her eyes caught Karoline approaching, and for the first time that day, the vice president appeared uncertain. Karoline didn't wait for permission. She walked past the teleprompter and floral displays, stopping a few feet from Harris. She lifted the folded flag. "You don't get to say his name," she said, clear, steady, and firm. The audience froze. Cameras zoomed in. Kamala blinked, visibly caught off guard. "He died fighting for a nation you keep trying to redefine," Karoline continued, her voice cutting through the silence. "You erase him in life. Don't pretend to mourn him in death." Gasps spread through the audience. Backstage staff were already on their headsets, signaling security. But Karoline stood firm. She wasn't there for politics. She was there to uphold the truth. Kamala Harris stiffened, her hands gripping the podium as if anchoring herself. For the first time, her carefully managed grief had been openly challenged on live television. She glanced toward her aides, expecting action, but no one moved. The moment was too charged to interrupt. Karoline held her ground. The folded American flag in her hands wasn't symbolic decoration. It was Charlie's, given to her by his family only days earlier. She had promised him she wouldn't let the moment be misused. Used for show. And now, here she was, keeping that promise. "You erase him from every press room and every official statement," Karoline said, her voice carrying clear conviction. "You called him dangerous. You mocked his faith. Your silence after his death was louder than any speech you could give." Kamala swallowed hard. "This is a time for unity. No," Karoline replied firmly, her voice rising. "This is a time for truth." The audience, veterans, students, faith leaders, and longtime supporters of Charlie, began to murmur. A few clapped softly. Others nodded. Many had witnessed similar tributes from people who had never defended Charlie, never stood beside him, and never shared the weight of his battles. "You waited for the cameras to roll before showing grief," Karoline went on. "Where were you when his name trended with hate? Where were you when your allies labeled him a fascist for quoting the Constitution?" Kamala tried to regain control. "We may not have agreed. You never debated him," Karoline interrupted. "You dismissed him. Charlie Kirk didn't bend to your narratives. He didn't waver when critics closed in. And now that is gone, you think you can end the story on your terms." Karoline stepped closer, forcing Kamala to move back slightly. "You don't get to bury what you tried to destroy." The crowd erupted. Applause broke out, immediate, sharp, and defiant. Kamala's security detail moved forward, uncertain whether to intervene. Karoline turned slowly toward the cameras, holding the folded flag high. "He died believing in America," she said, her voice unsteady but unwavering. "And I won't let that belief be rewritten by those who once branded him a villain." Kamala turned away from the podium. For the first time, it wasn't Karoline being silenced. It was a vice president of the United States. Karoline stood beneath the harsh press lights, the flag still firm in her grasp like a blade. Her words echoed through the cathedral-like chamber, now quiet except for the rapid clicks of reporters capturing the moment. Kamala had stepped back, but the microphones picked up her shallow, uneven breath. She had come expecting praise and a spotlight on her empathy. But Karoline's words had stripped away the performance, exposing what lay beneath. "You mocked him," Karoline said, eyes locked on Kamala. "When he spoke about faith, you laughed. When he prayed for peace, you rolled your eyes. And now you think quoting a verse will clear your conscience." Karoline moved toward center stage. The room held its breath. "This isn't about unity," she said. "This is about power. You turned his death into a platform, thinking you could sound profound without confronting what you did while he lived." Kamala's expression shifted, not dramatically, but in small, telling ways, a tightened jaw, a faint twitch near her eye. Her gaze flicked toward her press secretary, standing frozen near the curtain with a phone in hand, waiting for direction on how to spin the footage. "You called him extreme," Karoline continued. "But Charlie was never afraid to say what millions were thinking. You tried to silence him because he made people question the narrative. He made young Americans believe again. And that, more than anything, is what you feared. Threatened you." A voice from the crowd called out, "Say it again." Karoline turned toward the sound, her tone rising. "You don't get to use faith as cover after smearing everyone who lives by it. You don't get to mourn him now, not when you called his supporters a threat to democracy, not when your office tried to shut down every event he ever organized." Behind them, the screen, originally set to display a slideshow of unity images prepared by the administration, suddenly flickered. Someone in the control booth had switched feeds. Now it played clips of Charlie's speeches, reading from the Constitution, praying outside Congress, calling for peace during riots. The audience gasped. Kamala's jaw fell slightly. Karoline stayed composed. "You didn't just ignore him," she said. "You erased him." Then she turned fully to the audience. "You can't claim his legacy now. Legacy belongs to those who stood with him, not to those who tried to silence him." With a smile, the crowd erupted, not with polite claps, but with thunderous applause that carried a message. The performance was over. Kamala Harris had entered the church expecting a eulogy. Instead, she faced a reckoning as Karoline stepped off the stage. The event didn't end. It shifted. Reporters surrounded her. Cameras rolled. Staffers scrambled to regain control. But the crowd wasn't moving toward Kamala. They followed Karoline, chanting Charlie's name like a wave inside a building meant for quiet. Kamala remained at the podium, frozen. Her fingers gripped its edges, knuckles whitening, the confidence gone from her expression. She whispered something to an aide, but the MIC caught it faintly. "We need to end this." Karoline turned back. "Oh, you want to end it now," she said, her voice cutting through the hall. "You didn't want to end it when Painless on MSNBC called him a terrorist for quoting scripture. You stayed silent when your allies compared him to January 6 rioters because he defended the border." She walked slowly toward the center aisle. "You want his blessing now that is gone. But when he was alive, you let them mock his family. You allowed lies about his campaign, his church, even his mother." Karoline held up a printed headline. In bold black letters, "Charlie Kirk, the dangerous face of Christian nationalism that I kept the receipts," she said. "All of them." Gasps moved through the room. Kamala tried to respond, but Karoline raised a hand. "No, not this time." She pulled out her phone. The screen lit up with Charlie's final message to her before he disappeared from public life. "They'll twist everything, Karoline, but keep going. They can't destroy what we believe in, that I won't let them rewrite him," she said. "Not when the same people trying to mourn him spent years erasing him from public life." Then she faced the front pews, where top politicians sat stiffly: Schumer, Pelosi, Omar, Noam. "You don't get to act like you supported him. You stood on him. You climbed over his voice to reach your podiums. And now you demand silence." She pointed to a flag above the altar. "Charlie died carrying that flag in more ways than one. You disrespected it. And you think flowers and a few seconds of stage sorrow will change that." The silence was overwhelming. No one moved. Kamala lowered her gaze. Karoline took a deep breath and said quietly, "He never needed your approval, and neither do we." The silence wasn't peace. It was shock. Karoline's words had struck deeply. Even the cameras hesitated to cut away. Anchors didn't know whether to spin the moment or let it stand. But the crowd understood. They felt it, and they weren't leaving. Kamala's team whispered frantically as phones buzzed. Karoline walked toward the front row, where officials sat like statues. Looking directly at Kamala, she said, "You could have stopped it when they dragged him through headlines, when they froze his accounts, when they laughed as his wife begged for help on live television. You could have spoken, but you didn't." Kamala shifted, her lips pressed tight. Karoline turned to the crowd. "When they labeled him a domestic threat, none of you asked why. None of you spoke while they tore down a man who loved his country. You stayed silent." Gasps came from the back rows. One clap echoed, then another, until the sound spread, not applause, but a shared realization. "You let the media frame his death as expected, even convenient," Karoline said. "But tell me, was it really Charlie you feared? Or was it the truth he carried every time he stood on a stage?" She turned toward the camera. "This isn't a debate. This is a eulogy taken over by the same system that tried to erase him. And you know what? That system is about to fall." Karoline moved toward the microphone Kamala had abandoned earlier. "You want peace now," she said. "Now that is gone, you don't get to ask for peace after profiting from chaos. You don't get to mourn when your hands helped bury him." The audience rose slowly at first, then in waves. No one shouted. No one chanted. They stood in solemn defiance. Kamala sat motionless, blinking rapidly, her composure fractured. Karoline, holding Charlie's Bible in one hand and the Constitution in the other, spoke firmly. "Peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from truth." And we're done whispering. The stillness in the church broke as Karoline stepped down from the podium, not in retreat, but with determination. The audience remained standing, shoulder to shoulder, silent but filled with the same fire that ran through her. She turned toward the large portrait of Charlie near the altar, his face framed by the flag he had carried across campuses, rallies, and the arenas of public debate. "They call that dangerous. They call that radical," she said. Karoline wasn't finished. She walked to the edge of the stage, unhooked the lapel mic they had once tried to mute, and raised her voice, this time without restraint. "You let them call him a terrorist." Gasps echoed across the cathedral. "That's what they printed. That's what they posted. That's what your networks allowed to trend. Not one of you stopped it. Not one of you stood up and said, 'This man bled for his country.' In words, in truth, in spirit. No, you smiled. You let them erase him. And you know exactly who I'm talking about." She didn't need to name names. Journalists in the front row shifted in their seats, thought he was followed. He was flagged. He was branded an extremist because he believed in borders, because he quoted the founders, because he said faith still matters. She paused, holding the Constitution high. You let them twist his love for America into a weapon. But guess what? You failed. You buried his body, but not his cause. The murmurs in the room turned into quiet prayers, then into something stronger, a steady hum of momentum. It was political. It was spiritual. And it wasn't stopping. Karoline turned toward Kamala again. "You want us silent while you rewrite this to fit your next campaign ad? No, this isn't politics anymore. This is personal. This is about the soul of the nation. And I won't watch you distort his legacy to protect your image." She returned to the center of the room and faced the crowd directly. "Charlie Kirk was not a terrorist. He was a patriot. And if that truth puts me next on your list, I'll stand where he stood, unafraid." The silence that followed wasn't fair. It was resolve. It was energy. It was a beginning of something they couldn't contain. That Karoline's words didn't just hang in the air. They became a challenge. Even Kamala shifted uneasily, a flicker of discomfort breaking through her practiced composure. She had expected a careful, scripted service. Instead, she faced a blaze. Karoline stood center stage, unshaken. "You think you control the narrative because you control the press. But I don't need a teleprompter to speak truth. And I don't need a blue check to know Charlie didn't die in vain." She held up a phone, displaying a screenshot of a deleted tweet. A blue-haired activist calling Charlie a threat to democracy. "You let this happen. Your silence let lies spread like rut. He was stalked, doxxed, harassed, and you never defended him. Not because he was wrong, but because he spoke the truth." The congregation, a mix of young people, older citizens, and veterans standing with folded arms, began nodding. Others raised their phones to record. The mainstream cameras might cut the feed, but the internet wouldn't forget. Karoline stepped forward. And now you walk in here like you care, with flowers, a scripted statement, and aides whispering in your ear. Kamala, where were you when they burned his image in the street? She didn't wait for an answer. You were silent, just like when veterans were left in tents while illegal migrants got hotel rooms. Silent when faith was mocked. Silent when girls were erased from their own sports. Silent when working families were crushed by inflation. She turned back to the audience. And now you want me to be quiet in a church because the truth makes you uncomfortable. The crowd stayed again. Moore stood, not in silence this time, but in open defiance. This isn't just about Charlie, Karoline continued. This is about every American you tried to silence, shame, or push aside. You built this moment, not me. She pointed toward the doors at the back. I don't need permission to speak in God's house. I don't need your approval to defend a man who gave his life for this country, not with a weapon, but with his voice, her own voice cracked, not from weakness, but conviction. You want to bury the truth? I'll dig it up myself. I'll read every name that smeared him. I'll expose every lie told about him. I'll name every agency that ignored his warnings until it was too late. She lowered her phone, her eyes unwavering. The church was silent, but it wasn't over. Karoline stepped down from the podium, not as someone retreating, but as someone advancing into battle. Her footsteps echoed through the cathedral, each one deliberate that as you sat in your D.C. lounges, she said, voice unwavering. Charlie was receiving death threats. While your administration held pride ceremonies on federal buildings, he was tracking cartel activity at the southern border. He was mapping fentanyl routes. He was risking his safety. And you, she turned directly to Kamala, you called him dangerous. The crowd gasped. The cameras kept rolling despite the frantic whispers of staffers. Karoline held up a phone, revealing a Homeland Security report. The redactions were sloppy. Charlie's name was still clearly visible beneath the ink. This wasn't random, she continued. He wasn't some fringe voice shouting into the void. He had intel. He had evidence. And your agencies knew it. She zoomed in on a date on the screen. 3 weeks before Charlie's death, this briefing, she said, was sent to DHS, the FBI, and yes, your office. He was begging to be heard. And you left his warnings unread. She drew a steady breath. When I say his blood is on your hands, that's not rhetoric. It's not symbolic. It's real. The weight of her words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. You amplified the voices that demonize him. You gave platforms to influencers who smayed him. You stood by while big tech throttled every post he made about trafficking and border breaches. And now you arrive here with cameras, sympathy and security, pretending you cared. Karoline stepped closer. Her voice dropped. You didn't just let the wolves in. You fed them. That broke the dam. That a veteran in the back rose to his feet and shouted, "Damn right!" A woman in the front pew clutched a folded flag, tears streaming down her face. Phones went up. Live stream spread. The hashtag #CharlieWarnUs was already trending. Karoline raised Charlie's worn Bible, its spine cracked, a verse underlined in red. The truth will set you free. She looked Kamala in the eye. But before truth frees you, it convicts you. She returned to the altar, not to mourn, but to finish what Charlie started. The space transformed from a memorial into a reckoning. She placed the Bible beside the folded flag, then faced the crowd. They didn't hate him because he was loud, she said. They hated him because he was right. She held up Charlie's final report. Inside were handwritten notes, surveillance photos, timestamps, real evidence. They called him a conspiracy theorist, she continued, voice steady. But when did conspiracy start meaning classified truth? Even reporters lowered their cameras, realizing this wasn't just a funeral anymore. This was a firestorm. Karoline flipped to the final page. This document lists every official Charlie believed was responsible for enriching the cartels and dismantling our borders. And now, the truth will speak, endangering every American family. He wasn't vague. He named names. Karoline paused, then locked eyes with Kamala. Including yours. The room froze. Gasps rippled through the sanctuary. Raw and unfiltered. Did he believe you didn't just neglect your duty? Karoline continued. You sabotaged it. He wrote that your silence, your cover-ups, and your refusal to secure the border made you complicit. She dropped the page onto the altar like a gavel striking would not go on. Call him a liar now, she said, voice cracking, not from grief, but from fury. Do it. America's listening. They are listening because he can't speak anymore that a slow ripple of applause started, unplanned, uncoordinated, but real. Veterans, mothers, border agents, even a few members of the press joined in. The clapping grew until it roared through the cathedral. Karoline pointed toward the cameras. If the vice president won't speak, then we will. Every family that's lost a loved one to fentanyl. Every town destroyed by unchecked gangs. Every mother who buried her child while this administration played politics. Her voice steadied. You tried to erase Charlie, but he wrote the last word. She held up the file. He said if anything happened to him, this had to go public. Karoline handed the file to an independent journalist. The cameras zoomed in. There was no going back. They tried to silence him. She said, louder now. But the whole nation is listening. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. The air hummed like a power line about to snap. And then it did. Reporters surged forward, not for sound bites, but for the truth. Outlets that had ignored Charlie were now scrambling for copies. The independent journalist began uploading the scans in real time. The headline read, Kirk's final report, the names behind the border crisis. Karoline stepped down from the podium, but her presence still filled the room. As she moved through the pews, hands reached out to touch hers. A gold star mother pressed her forehead to Karoline's shoulder and whispered, He died for all of us. A Border Patrol officer nodded, eyes glistening. We needed this. We needed you. Outside, protesters who had shouted racist and fascist earlier had fallen silent, confronted with a reality that couldn't be chanted away. Karoline walked past them with her head high, flanked by veterans and families who had once followed Charlie, and now followed her hours later. The White House issued a shaky press release. Kamala's office called the funeral partisan and accused Karoline of politicizing tragedy. But it was too late. The story had already gone viral. #Kirk was right trended nationwide. Back at her hotel, Karoline locked the door, the weight of the day pressing down, but not breaking her. Grief didn't weaken her. It sharpened her resolve. She opened her laptop and began typing, America deserves the truth. And Charlie deserved justice, she titled the post. He warned UWI mourning. It had exploded across every network. Analysts dissected Charlie's report live on air, bank records, NGO contracts, internal DHS memos, all lining up with his claims. But more powerful than the documents was a movement his death ignited. Town halls filled. Veterans carried his photo to state capitals. Parents who'd lost children to cartel trafficking quoted his words at rallies. The political class tried to change the subject. They failed days later. Karoline stood before Congress, not as a guest, but as a force that I don't stand here alone, she declared. I carry his truth. I carry every family he fought for. And I will never let his name be buried in lies. Across America, millions stood with her. They didn't whisper anymore. They roared. Some names echo long after they are gone, not because they were loud, but because they were right. Charlie Kirk wasn't a celebrity chasing cameras. He walked into chaos when others hid behind titles. And when it cost him everything, they tried to bury him in silence. Karoline didn't let them. She stood where others backed down. She named names. She held the evidence. She raised his Bible. And she turned one man's silence warning into a national reckoning. This wasn't a political stunt. This was justice to those who mocked the fallen, to leaders who funded chaos while pretending to mourn. Your time is up. The truth you tried to bury has become unshakable. Because Charlie's blood didn't mark the END that IT marked the beginning, and Karoline made sure the world saw it.